Have you ever cared for someone so deeply that when they drifted away, it felt like a piece of you was torn out with them? You shared memories, late night conversations, laughter, maybe even parts of your identity. And then one day, their absence became heavier than their presence ever was. It lingers, confusing, painful, almost impossible to carry. And in that quiet wait, you may find yourself asking, how do I let go of someone who still lives in my thoughts? How do I stop being so attached without becoming bitter or worse, completely numb? This is where the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius and the Stoics offers clarity. They never taught us to bury our emotions, but rather to master them, not to stop caring, but to stop clinging. Today, here on Stoicism Breath, we're going to explore 5 powerful Stoic rules that will help you emotionally detach while staying grounded in your own strength. If even a part of you is ready to reclaim your peace, stay with me. What you discover here may be exactly what your soul has been waiting for. Rule number 1. Understand the impermanence of life. Have you ever tried to hold on so tightly to someone that the harder you clutched, the further they slipped away? Maybe it was a friend who once called you every single day, or a partner you thought would always be there. One day they were woven into the fabric of your life, part of your routine, even part of who you believed you were. And then suddenly, silence. No fight, no clear ending, just absence. And in that silence we suffer. Not only because they're gone, but because deep down we never prepared ourselves for the reality that they could leave. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "Everything we hear is an opinion, not a fact. Everything we see is a perspective, not the truth." When we become emotionally attached, we don't just bond with people, we build stories around them. Stories of permanence, stories of guarantees, stories that reality does not promise. The Stoics understood a hard truth: nothing in life is truly ours. Not people, not moments, not even our youth. Everything is borrowed. Everything eventually changes. That's why the first rule of detachment is to accept impermanence. And this isn't pessimism, it's preparation. When you truly accept that everything is fleeting, you stop clinging out of fear. You begin to appreciate each moment for what it is, instead of trying to trap it in permanence. I once had a friendship that lasted over a decade. We shared secrets, dreams, fears. We had conversations that stretched into the morning hours. And then, life shifted. The messages grew less frequent. The calls stopped. I found myself holding on tighter, sending texts, trying to revive what was fading. Each effort felt heavier, emptier. Why was I still holding on? Because in my mind, that friendship was supposed to last forever. But I wasn't grieving the truth. I was grieving the story I'd written in my own head. It wasn't until I finally accepted that the friendship had run its natural course that I felt free. There was no betrayal, no big ending, just the quiet reality of change. And in that acceptance, I remembered the wisdom of Marcus Aurelius. Accept everything which happens, even if it seems disagreeable, because it leads to the health of the universe. Letting go didn't mean giving up. It meant stepping back into the present moment where peace actually lives. Peace isn't something you chase in the future, it lives here in the present moment. Think of impermanence like the ocean tide. You can't stop the waves no matter how hard you try. The more you resist, the more exhausted you become. But when you learn to float, to move with the current instead of fighting it, a strange calm takes over. Because you finally stop trying to hold on to what was never yours to keep. The Stoics practiced this daily. They trained their minds with an exercise called premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. They would imagine loss before it happened, not to suffer twice, but to suffer less. They reminded themselves, this person I love may one day leave. This thing I value may break. This season of life will not last. And by doing so they became stronger, calmer, more present. It's easy to believe that if something matters deeply, it should last forever. But life doesn't work that way. Friendships drift, love fades, people grow apart. That's not a tragedy, it's the rhythm of existence. And when you understand that rhythm, you stop fighting against the beat. So reflect for a moment, what emotional weight are you still carrying, not because of the loss itself, but because you haven't accepted its impermanence? Are you mourning the reality of what ended, or the illusion that it would never change? Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means remembering clearly without distortion. It means honoring what was real without demanding it last forever. The truth is, people will come and go, but your peace, your ability to remain centered as life shifts, can be built, strengthened, and protected. In the end, the person who accepts the flow of life suffers less than the one who tries to dam the river. And once you've laid this foundation of detachment, the journey goes deeper, because knowing that life changes is only half the battle. The next step is mastering what happens inside your mind when emotions rise and try to overpower your reason. Rule 2. Master your emotions through rational thought. Imagine this: you send a heartfelt message to someone you care about. Hours pass with no reply. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts spiral. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? Have they moved on? Before you know it, a single moment of silence has become an emotional storm. But stop for a second. What actually happened? They didn't respond. That's it. Every anxious thought that followed was something your mind created. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." The Stoics understood that emotions are not facts. They are the result of how we think. Pain, sadness, anger, they feel automatic, but they don't come from events themselves. They come from the meaning we assign to those events. And that's both the hard truth and the liberating one. The second rule of emotional detachment is this: master your emotions by mastering your thoughts. This isn't about shutting down or suppressing what you feel. It's about questioning the story behind the feeling, challenging the interpretation that is feeding your pain. Epictetus said it best: it's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. In other words, life itself doesn't hurt you. Your interpretation of life does. Think about a breakup. The relationship ends and suddenly it feels like your entire world is falling apart. You replay every conversation in your head, obsessing over what you should have said, what you could have done differently. You wonder, how could they move on so quickly? Why didn't it matter more to them? But pause for a moment and ask, what are the actual facts here? The fact is simple: the relationship ended. Everything else, the meaning you attach to it, the worth you assign to yourself because of it, that's not reality, that's thought. And thoughts can be changed. I learnt this lesson the hard way. Years ago, after a deep conversation with a close friend, I felt more connected than ever. The next day I sent a follow-up message. No reply. Hours passed, then an entire day. By nightfall, my mind had already written a tragic story. I must have said too much. Maybe I crossed a line, maybe I'd ruined the friendship completely. My thoughts raced, and my emotions followed. But the next morning my friend replied casually as if nothing had happened. It turned out they had a family emergency and hadn't even checked their phone. They weren't upset, they weren't distant, they were just unavailable. That moment changed me. My suffering wasn't caused by their silence. It was caused by my interpretation of their silence. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the colour of its thoughts." And I had let fear and insecurity paint my mind in the darkest shades. Instead of waiting in peace, I chose to suffer in speculation. This is the choice we all face daily. Will you believe every thought that pops into your head, or will you pause and ask, is this real or just a reaction? Because when you stop treating every emotional surge as truth, you begin to take back control. Mastering your emotions doesn't mean becoming robotic. It means becoming sovereign. It means choosing thoughts that protect your peace instead of ones that poison it. So the next time the storm builds inside you, when anger rises, when anxiety tightens your chest, when sadness drags you down, ask yourself, what am I actually reacting to? What are the facts, and what story am I creating on top of them? This inner questioning isn't easy. It takes discipline. It takes awareness. But it's the only way to free yourself from emotions that were never rooted in reality. And here's the reward. When you learn to think clearly, you begin to feel clearly. That is the true beginning of detachment. And once you've started to reclaim the power of your mind, the next step is even deeper, building the resilience to stand tall even when loss is inevitable.
This is where the Stoics practice something radical negative visualization. They believed that facing your fears calmly and deliberately wasn't weakness, it was strength.
Marcus Aurelius, writing in the quiet hours of war and political burden, reminded himself, "Do not disturb yourself by imagining the whole of your life's troubles at once. Rather, as each arises, meet it with calmness and self-control." Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself, "Do not disturb yourself by imagining the whole of your life's troubles at once. Rather, as each arises, meet it with calmness and self-control." The Stoics weren't teaching us to dwell in darkness. They were teaching us how to prepare for it. They called this practice premeditatio malorum, the premeditation of adversity. Today we call it negative visualization. At first it may sound strange. Why would anyone deliberately imagine losing what they love? But the truth is undeniable. Everything you care about is temporary. Your relationships, your routines, even your own body. You can choose to ignore this reality or you can prepare for it. And preparation doesn't harden your heart, it strengthens your spirit.
A few years ago, one of my closest friends told me they were thinking of moving across the world. We were inseparable daily calls, inside jokes, late night talks about life and purpose. And suddenly there was a real chance I'd wake up one morning and they would no longer be here. My first instinct was denial. No way. This won't happen. I'll figure something out. But that resistance only made the fear grow stronger. Then I remembered the Stoics. I began practicing what they taught. Every morning I would take a few quiet moments to imagine life without them, not as punishment but as preparation. I pictured sitting alone at the coffee shop where we used to meet. I visualized walking into my apartment after a hard day and not hearing their voice on the other end of the phone. Then I went further, imagining new routines, new conversations, new ways to grow without them. When the day finally came and they moved away, it still hurt, but the pain didn't crush me. I had already walked through that goodbye 100 times in my mind. Because of that, I didn't fall apart. I adapted. That is the power of negative visualization. You don't practice it to suffer in advance. You practice it to weaken the shock, to remind yourself that you can survive what you fear. Loss is not the end. It's a transition. Seneca once wrote, "He robs present ills of their power, who has perceived their coming beforehand." When you stop expecting everything to stay the same, you stop feeling entitled to permanence. And when you let go of that entitlement, you loosen the grip of fear that holds you every time something feels fragile. Think about your own life. Maybe you're in a relationship right now, constantly worried that it might end. Maybe you overthink every text, every pause in conversations, every subtle shift in tone. You tell yourself you're just being cautious. But beneath that caution lives fear, the fear of losing what you believe you cannot live without.
What if, instead of running from that fear, you walk directly into it? Picture the worst case scenario. Let yourself feel it, then take it one step further. Visualize your life after. What would you rebuild? Who would you become? Which friendships would you deepen? What strengths would you discover in yourself? The more you do this, the more fear loosens its grip. You stop needing guarantees. You stop demanding permanence. You start trusting your own resilience. Because emotional detachment doesn't mean you care less, it means you live with clarity. You enjoy what you have while you have it without clinging to the illusion that it will last forever. Preparing your mind for the moment when something or someone you love may no longer be there is not morbid, it's wisdom. So the next time you catch yourself clinging tightly, ask, what am I afraid to lose? And what would it look like if I could lose it and still stand tall? Because that is the true heart of Stoic resilience. It's not about avoiding loss, it's about walking through the possibility of it and realizing that even after loss, you are still whole. Now that the mind is strengthened to face change, the next step is shifting focus toward the one thing you can always influence, what is within your control. This leads us to Rule 4, focus on what you can control. Have you ever felt like you were doing everything right? You were thoughtful, present, giving your best to someone, and still it wasn't enough. They grew distant, they pulled away. No matter how much effort you put in, it felt like chasing a shadow that slipped further through your hands. That sense of helplessness of giving everything and still losing can consume you. It leaves you asking, what more could I have done? How do I fix this? But here's the truth. The Stoics understood deeply, suffering begins the moment we try to control what is not ours to command. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events."
Realize this and you will find strength. That single sentence carries a lifetime of freedom. The reality is this much of our emotional pain, especially in relationships, comes from our desperate attempts to control the uncontrollable. Their feelings, their decisions, their behaviour. We bend, we adjust, we perform, all in the hope that they will stay or love us the way we love them. But it never works, because no matter how perfect you try to be, you cannot govern someone else's heart. I remember being in a relationship where I felt I had to constantly earn my place. I planned thoughtful dates, I sent kind messages, I tried to anticipate every need. Yet the more I gave, the less I felt seen. They withdrew and I tried harder. It became a cycle, me pouring out more than pulling further away. Eventually I burned out completely. And only then did I realize the problem wasn't that I wasn't enough. The problem was that I was trying to control how they felt about me. And that was never in my hands to begin with. That is the essence of this rule: focus only on what you can control. Your thoughts, your actions, your choices, nothing more. You cannot make someone care. You cannot force someone to value you, but you can choose how you show up. You can choose whether to stay in a dynamic that drains you or to walk away with self-respect. The moment I stopped trying to manage someone else's emotions and started managing my own expectations, something shifted. I found peace, not because they changed, but because I did. I let go of the illusion that I could hold a relationship together through sheer effort, and in that letting go I reclaimed my freedom. In the act of letting go, I reclaimed my energy. Seneca once wrote, "It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste a lot of it." And one of the greatest wastes is trying to fix people who don't want to be fixed, or waiting on validation that may never come. When your happiness depends on someone else's attention, you've handed them power over your peace. That's not love, that's captivity. Picture yourself in a friendship where you're always the one reaching out, always the one keeping the connection alive, yet they never meet you halfway. Naturally, it hurts. You start replaying conversations, wondering if you said something wrong, searching for the moment everything shifted. But the Stoic answer is not to spiral. The answer is to pause and ask, what is mine to own here? You cannot force someone to show up. You cannot make them prioritize you. But you can decide whether you want to keep investing in someone who doesn't invest in you. That choice is yours, and within that choice lies your freedom. Emotional detachment here doesn't mean shutting people out. It means releasing the need for them to be anything other than what they are. It means stopping the chase. You stop making your peace conditional on their presence, their affection, or their approval. You create emotional autonomy, a self that stands steady no matter who comes or goes. There was a time in my own life when I realized I had given far too much power to how others treated me. If someone was warm, I felt worthy. If someone was cold, I felt rejected. My self-worth was on a roller coaster I couldn't control. But when I began to apply Stoic principles, something shifted. I anchored my worth in who I chose to be, not in how others responded. And that changed everything. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." The pain you feel right now, the rejection, the confusion, the longing, that is not a signal to fix the other person. It is your path to fix your focus. So if you find yourself asking, what can I do to make them come back? How do I make this right? You're asking the wrong questions. The real questions are, what is mine to control? What is mine to release? Because the moment you let go of what you cannot control, you begin to rise, not in bitterness, but in clarity. And once you've learned to reclaim that power, it's time to go one step further. Because when you step back and look at the bigger picture, something powerful happens. You dissolve the illusion that one person or one moment has the power to define your worth. Rule 5. Reflect on the bigger picture. When the end of a relationship feels like the collapse of your entire world, when every memory stings and every hour feels heavier than the last, it's easy to believe your future has been erased. But this is exactly where the Stoic perspective is not just useful, it's life-saving. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have to assemble your life yourself, action by action, and be satisfied if each one achieves its goal as far as possible. In other words, zoom out. This moment you feel like you're drowning in it is not your whole story. It's just a scene, not the entire script. When we grow emotionally attached to someone, our vision narrows. They become the center of everything, our happiness, our worth, even our future. So when they leave or disappoint us, it feels as though we've lost ourselves too. But the truth is this: you were always more than that one person. You were always more than that single chapter. I remember going through a breakup that felt like the end of my world, not because they betrayed me or did something unforgivable, but because I had tied so much of my identity to being with them. I had stopped seeing the bigger picture of my life. For weeks I couldn't sleep. I couldn't think straight. Everything felt dim and heavy. Then something shifted. One night I went for a long walk under a sky full of stars.
And for the first time, I asked myself, will this really matter in 5 years? Does this person truly define the meaning of my life? That single question cracked the illusion wide open. I began to remember the other parts of myself that existed long before that relationship, my passions, my friends, my purpose. Slowly I started to rebuild, and what helped most wasn't distraction, it was perspective. I realized that the breakup wasn't the ending, it was a turning point in a much longer, richer journey. That's what the Stoics teach us, to view life from a higher altitude, to remember that every storm eventually clears, and when it does, you'll still be standing stronger, wiser, and more grounded than before. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself often that our fears, our attachments, even our grief, are fleeting in the grand flow of time. He wrote, "Time is like a river made up of events that happen, and a violent stream."
For as soon as a thing has been seen, it is carried away and another comes in its place. So if you're hurting right now, it's not about pretending the pain doesn't exist. It's about looking wider. Step back. Ask yourself, what will this look like in 5 years? In 10 years? Think about how many moments you've already survived that once felt unbearable, and yet every time you rose, every time you became someone new. That's not chance, that's growth. When you reflect on the bigger picture, you loosen the grip that temporary people and temporary moments hold over your lasting peace. You stop letting one season define your entire journey. And when you do that, you stop reacting out of panic and you start responding with purpose. So if this message resonates with you, take one simple action. Write the word perspective below. A reminder to yourself and to others to zoom out, to breathe, and to remember this moment is not your whole life. And if you have made it this far, consider subscribing to Stoicism Breath. This is a space for those who want to think deeper, live calmer, and rise stronger. Because emotional detachment isn't about shutting down, it's about waking up to the truth of how big your life really is. Let this be the beginning of that awakening. You've learned what it means to let go with clarity, to see people as they are, not as you hoped they would be. You face the grief of emotional distance, and you've accepted the truth that not everything broken is meant to be fixed. But here's the deeper lesson most people miss: detachment is not the finish line, it's the threshold. Because once you stop chasing what no longer serves your peace, the real question emerges: what are you running toward? You're no longer gripping the past, but what are you holding now? Is it silence, emptiness, or is it space? A space ready to be filled with something stronger, something more real.
This is the sacred turning point, the moment where clarity must evolve into action, where letting go transforms into building, where the energy once scattered trying to save someone else finally returns to you. Now begins the real work, not the work of forgetting but of forging, not of avoiding pain but of rising through it. This is the deeper Stoic path, the one that doesn't just teach you how to stop caring about the wrong people, but how to start becoming the right person for yourself. Because true Stoicism was never about suppression, it was about transformation. Not about becoming less emotional, but about becoming more unshakable, more anchored in yourself, more rooted in what you can control and who you are becoming. So in part 2, we step beyond detachment into self-mastery, into the art of rebuilding from the inside out, into the discipline of no longer being a reaction to what hurt you, but becoming a force so steady no person and no departure can ever unseat your peace again. You are not here just to survive loss. You are here to rise with new vision and to build a life so meaningful, so self-led that nothing external can shake it. Rule 1. You don't owe anyone your breakdown. There are moments when you give everything to hold a relationship together, patience, forgiveness, endless understanding, only to realize you're the only one holding it at all. You talk, you compromise, you try harder, and still nothing changes. They keep pulling away and you keep reaching, believing that if you just sacrifice a little more, maybe they'll return. This is the trap so many fall into, the belief that love means sacrifice at any cost, that if someone is slipping away, it's your job to grip tighter, that if they're unhappy, it's your job to fix it. But the Stoics would remind us otherwise.
Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Be tolerant with others and strict with yourself." That doesn't mean tolerating being used. It means holding on to your integrity even when others lose theirs. It means taking responsibility for your own peace, not for someone else's chaos. You were not put here to be someone's emotional firefighter. You were not born to bleed quietly so someone else could avoid their healing. The Stoic way is not coldness, it's clarity. And clarity means recognizing the line where compassion ends and self-destruction begins. I remember the story of a woman who spent years in a relationship with a man who refused to grow. He would disappear emotionally for days only to reappear with excuses. And each time she opened her arms again. She believed that if she just showed enough love eventually, he would choose to stay. One night after another long silence, he finally said, "I never asked you to care so much." And that broke her. Not because it was cruel, but because it was true. He never asked, but she kept giving. She had confused her willingness to help with responsibility. She thought that carrying his burdens proved her worth. But in reality, it only buried her beneath the weight of someone else's problems. Seneca once said, "He who suffers before it is necessary suffers more than is necessary." The suffering you carry because of someone else's neglect is not noble, it's misplaced. You do not need to explain yourself to those who have already chosen not to understand you. You do not need to lose your identity trying to hold together something that is falling apart, because one person refuses to meet you halfway. Detachment in this case is not a lack of love, it is the highest form of respect for yourself. It is looking at someone and saying, "I care about you, but I will not destroy myself to prove it." It is stepping out of the role of the rescuer and realizing your energy is too sacred to waste on saving someone who has no interest in saving themselves. The moment you stop setting yourself on fire to keep someone else warm, something incredible happens. You feel lighter. You begin to see the difference between connection and codependency. You start reclaiming the parts of yourself that were always gasping for air beneath all that emotional weight. And perhaps the hardest truth of all, no one is going to give you permission to stop. You have to choose it. You must decide that your peace matters more than their approval, that your dignity matters more than their confusion, and that sometimes your silence will be the only language they ever understand. The Stoics remind us that virtue means clarity, not martyrdom. To act with compassion, yes, but never at the cost of your own peace. To give without expectation, but never give yourself away.
So if you find yourself in that place, always explaining, always fixing, always giving more than you receive, step back. Not because you're cold, but because you're finally clear. And once you learn to protect that peace, the next step is even more powerful. Rule 2: build a life so full you don't chase what's gone. There is a certain silence that follows the end of a connection. The texts stop, the calls fade, the routines that once gave structure to your day vanish overnight. And in that silence, it is easy to mistake absence for emptiness. You tell yourself, "I feel this way," because they're gone. But what if the truth runs deeper? What if what you're really feeling isn't just the loss of a person, but the space where your own life should have been? The Stoics were never obsessed with people. They were obsessed with building a life so anchored in purpose, so full of meaning that no single departure could ever take it away. The Stoics were not obsessed with people.
They were obsessed with principles, with building a life that could stand strong on its own. Seneca said, "A great mind becomes a great fortune." In other words, if you want to stop being shaken by what leaves, start building what no one can ever take from you. After a breakup, most people rush to fill the void with distraction, new faces, new pleasures, noise to drown out the silence. But Stoicism teaches the opposite. Don't run from the space they left. Step into it. Let that emptiness become the room where you finally grow. I once knew a man who lost the woman he thought he would marry. She ended things suddenly, No explanation, just silence. For weeks he was paralyzed. He wasn't only grieving her, but also the identity he had built around being with her. Then something shifted. He stopped checking her social media. He stopped replaying old conversations.
And instead he wrote down everything he had postponed for that relationship, dreams he had shelved, hobbies he had let die, friendships he had neglected. Slowly he started to rebuild, not to prove anything to her, but to remember himself. He went back to the gym. He picked up painting again. He spent time with people who gave energy instead of draining it. He stopped living on borrowed attention and started living from within. Months later she reached out, but by then he no longer needed closure. He had already closed the chapter himself. He had become someone whose life was simply too full to chase what had already walked away. That is the resilience Stoicism builds, not the coldness of saying I don't care anymore, but the strength of saying I am building something so grounded, so meaningful that I don't have time to chase what's gone. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily, very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself and your way of thinking.
That's not just poetic, it's a blueprint. Your routines, your body, your career, your learning. These are not distractions from heartbreak, they are the foundation of freedom. Letting go is not just about removing someone from your life. It is about filling that space with everything you've been neglecting. When your world no longer revolves around one person, it opens up. You notice beauty again, you grow stronger, you develop skills, and you become attractive in a way that has nothing to do with romance and everything to do with power. So stop asking, how do I get them back? And start asking, what can I build now that they're gone? Because that is the shift. That is where detachment becomes transformation. Your grief deserves space, but so does your growth. Don't fill the silence they left behind with longing. Fill it with purpose, with movement, with creation. And the more you do, the less their absence feels like a loss, and the more it begins to feel like the beginning of your return to yourself. Next, we'll go even deeper into this transformation, into how rejection, instead of being a wound, can actually become a doorway. Because what feels like being pushed away may just be the universe repositioning you for something greater. Rule 3. Turn rejection into inner reinvention. There is a moment after rejection that feels like the world stops turning. You hear the silence, you read the message, you notice the coldness in their tone, and somewhere inside something collapses. It isn't just your plans with them, it's the story you were writing around them, the future you imagined, the identity you tied to being chosen by them. Rejection cuts deeper than most of us admit, not because of what we lose, but because of what it forces us to confront about ourselves. But the Stoics saw rejection differently. To them, rejection wasn't a punishment, it was a revelation. Seneca wrote, "It is when we are cast out that we find better ground." When you are pushed away, it's not always the world turning its back on you. Sometimes it's life removing what was unstable so you can rebuild on solid truth. Most people respond to rejection by shrinking. They overanalyze, they blame themselves, they replay every detail, wondering what was missing, what went wrong, what they should have done differently. But the wiser question isn't, why didn't they choose me? It's, why was I waiting to be chosen in the first place? I once knew a man who applied for his dream job, something he had been working toward for years. He made it to the final round. His hopes were high, his interview was strong, but then came the email. We've decided to go in a different direction. He was crushed. For weeks he spiraled. Not because of the job itself, but because his entire identity was tied to that one outcome.
It wasn't just a career rejection, it felt like a rejection of who he was. But then he made a radical shift. Instead of staying in that pit, he turned inward. He asked himself the harder questions. What am I really after? What version of myself do I want to become with or without that title? He went back to his roots. He studied, he created, he rebuilt. A year later, he launched his own business in the same industry. The irony that same company later reached out to collaborate, but by then he no longer needed their validation because he had already validated himself. That is a shift. Rejection is not a closed door. It's a mirror. It shows you where you are giving your power away. It reflects back your deepest insecurities, your hidden dependencies. And if you are brave enough to face that mirror, it becomes a chisel. You don't just look at yourself, you reshape yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way." Rejection is not an obstacle to avoid. It is the raw material of reinvention. It is the beginning of a version of you that doesn't beg for belonging but builds its own ground. This doesn't mean you won't feel the sting. You will. The Stoic doesn't deny emotion. He studies it. He asks, what does this teach me about my ego, my expectations, my illusions? And then he lets the lesson burn away everything that isn't real. You are not here to be someone's option. You are not here to wait at the door of approval. You are here to build a life where rejection isn't the end, it's the beginning of your reinvention. You are here to build something so rooted, so solid, that rejection becomes irrelevant. Not because you've gone numb, but because you finally remembered your own worth. So the next time you hear no, let it echo not as a symbol of failure, but as a reminder of your freedom. Not as a sign of lack, but as proof of your potential. Because what left was never the whole of you. It was simply the part that wasn't meant to come with you into your next chapter. And in that next chapter, you'll need more than clarity. You'll need emotional wisdom, the ability to love without losing yourself. That brings us to the next lesson. Rule 4. Detach without becoming numb. There's a moment in healing when silence disguises itself as strength. You convince yourself you're getting better because you've stopped reaching out. You no longer cry. You no longer ask. You no longer feel the sting when their name appears. But deep down, you also don't feel much of anything at all. That isn't healing. That's hardening. You haven't grown stronger, you've simply gone numb. And that is not Stoicism. Stoicism does not ask us to be emotionally cold. It does not celebrate indifference. What it offers is far more difficult and far more noble. It asks us to become emotionally wise.
Marcus Aurelius wrote, "If you are pained by any external thing, it is not this thing that disturbs you, but your own judgment about it. That judgment, if left unchecked, becomes either obsessive attachment or complete emotional shutdown." The Stoic path is different. It is not about escaping emotion, it is about understanding it. It is about mastering it. It is about learning to live beside it without being ruled by it. To detach without becoming numb is the art of what I call warm separation. It's when your care is genuine but not enslaving. When you can love someone deeply but not lose yourself in the struggle to keep them. When you can give not because you need to be needed, but because giving aligns with who you are. This kind of strength is quiet. It doesn't demand attention. It doesn't need to be loud, but it is unshakable. I once heard the story of a man named Elias. He had been married for 7 years to a woman he adored.
From the outside, their life looks picture perfect, but on the inside, the emotional intimacy had quietly faded. She no longer really saw him. Her words were clipped. Her attention was elsewhere. And yet he held on not because he didn't see the truth, but because he didn't know how to walk away from something he had poured so much of himself into. One night he stumbled upon her journal left open by accident. Not out of snooping, but instinct, he read a page. What he found broke him. Reflections of how distant she felt from him, how trapped, how she longed for something more passionate, more alive. His first reaction was devastation. His second was detachment. But not the kind that heals, the kind that numbs. For months Elias moved through his days on autopilot. No arguments, no tears, just silence. To the outside world it looked like he was handling everything with grace, but inside he felt nothing. He had buried every emotion under the weight of pretending to be stoic, when in truth he was only afraid of feeling too much. It wasn't until a close friend confronted Elias and asked him, "When did you stop showing up for yourself?" that something inside him cracked open. For the first time he admitted the truth, he missed her. He was angry, he felt discarded. And by naming those emotions instead of burying them, he began to find clarity. He didn't explode. He didn't collapse. He simply spoke his truth, "I love you, but I refuse to become invisible just to keep this alive." And with those words he let go, not with coldness, but with calm. Not with blame, but with boundaries. That is what it truly means to detach without becoming numb. You don't sever your heart, you stretch it back toward yourself. You don't abandon the idea of love, you refine it. You don't retreat from intimacy, you become more discerning about who earns access to your inner life.
Seneca once wrote, A gem cannot be polished without friction, nor a man perfected without trials. That friction, that trial isn't found in feeling nothing. It's found in allowing yourself to feel fully without being consumed. It's in showing compassion while still walking away. It's in letting someone go without shutting yourself off from love forever. To detach in the Stoic way is to live with open eyes and an open heart, but with a spine of tempered steel. You don't let pain harden you, you let it sharpen your awareness. You don't become emotionless, you become emotionally sovereign. The world will tell you that numbness is strength, that cutting people off is power, that disappearing is maturity. But Stoicism teaches something far more radical. Real strength is staying present, staying soft, staying principled, even in the face of rejection or loss. Real strength is having the courage to feel and still choosing virtue over bitterness. So if you are walking the road of detachment right now, ask yourself, are you building walls or are you building boundaries? Are you shutting down or are you sitting with the discomfort until clarity emerges? Are you withdrawing in fear or stepping back with intention? Because the point is not to feel less. The point is to feel everything and still choose your response. That is warm detachment. That is emotional maturity. That is Stoic power. And once you master that balance between feeling deeply and standing firmly, you begin to unlock the final truth. You never needed them to complete you. You were already whole. They were just a chapter. Rule 5. You were always whole. They were just a chapter. There comes a moment in healing when the fog begins to lift. The silence is no longer deafening. The endless questions lose their grip. You stop replaying conversations in your mind. The what-ifs fade, the if-onlys dissolve. And in that quiet space, something unexpected happens.
You begin to feel your own weight again, not as a burden, but as a presence, a fullness, a center. And for the first time in a long time, you realize you were never broken. You were only distracted from yourself. When someone leaves, it often feels like they've taken something with them. A piece of your identity, your sense of safety, even your meaning. But the truth is, nothing essential was ever stolen. What's real in you cannot be lost. They were never your foundation. They were a chapter in your story, not the whole book. But that's the illusion, because nothing essential can ever be taken from you. Not your values, not your growth, not your soul. What they carried away was never your worth. It was simply the role they played in a chapter of your life. And like any chapter, it was meant to end. The Stoics were masters at teaching us how to see life in proportion. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." And
And what greater outside event is there than the presence or absence of another human being? But if you spend your life measuring your value by who arrives and who leaves, you will never stand still long enough to become who you truly are. You are not defined by who stayed. You are not diminished by who walked away. And you are not waiting to be completed by someone who may never return. You were whole before they arrived. You are whole now. You simply forgot that wholeness can feel quiet when you've grown used to emotional noise. I remember the story of a young man who fell deeply in love during a time when he felt most uncertain about himself. She brought colour into his days, meaning into his routines. Together they planned everything: holidays, future homes, even the names of children they hadn't yet conceived. It felt as if life finally made sense through her, but when it ended he was devastated. He no longer knew how to exist without her, because somewhere along the way she had become the story, and he had reduced himself to a side character in his own life. For months he couldn't sleep. He chased closure in long unanswered texts, reread old messages as if they were sacred, hoping for a spark of what once was. But nothing brought her back. Eventually, not from newfound strength but from sheer exhaustion, he stopped reaching, and in that space something unexpected happened. He picked up his guitar again. He reconnected with friends. He began writing not about her, but about himself. His voice returned, his spine straightened. Slowly he remembered what it felt like to live without orbiting someone else's gravity. One evening, sitting alone on a balcony with a cup of coffee, he whispered to himself, "I'm okay." Not because the pain was gone, but because the pain had done its work. It had carved space for him to finally come back home to himself. That is the Stoic gift of perspective. It reminds us that time doesn't erase meaning, it reveals it. What once felt like the end of everything becomes a turning point. What once consumed you becomes something you outgrow. And what once defined you becomes a simple footnote in the story you are still writing. Seneca said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." If heartbreak is a form of adversity, then detachment is the proof of growth. It's not about forgetting, it's about remembering who you were before you bent your identity to fit inside someone else's love. So yes, they mattered, yes, they shaped you, but they were never the whole book. They were a chapter, a paragraph, a sentence, maybe just a single beautiful word, but you are the author. And this page right here is the one where you stop writing for someone else's attention and begin creating something far deeper, a story rooted in your own integrity. Because the greatest form of freedom isn't simply moving on, it's moving in. Moving into yourself, into your values, into your silence, into your power. You will love again, but not from emptiness, from fullness. Not to be rescued, but to share. Not to search for meaning, but to offer it. And when that love comes, it won't feel like losing yourself all over again. It will feel like being recognized by someone who finally sees how whole you already are. This is not the ending. This is the moment you remember that everything you were chasing in someone else has always lived within you. All you needed was to pause long enough to hear your own voice again. So take a breath. Close that chapter. Walk forward, not with bitterness or regret, but with the quiet confidence of someone who has finally come home to themselves. The next time you catch yourself clinging too tightly to a person who no longer shows up, to memories that no longer serve you, or to a version of love that exists only in your imagination, pause, just pause, and ask yourself honestly, who has more control here, my emotions or me? This is where emotional freedom begins, not in cutting people off, not in pretending you don't care, but in choosing clarity over chaos, peace over proving, stillness over struggle. Marcus Aurelius once wrote, "The things you think about determine the quality of your mind. Your soul takes on the colour of your thoughts. If your thoughts are painted in fear, longing, or desperation, you drown in them. But if you train them toward virtue, resilience, and inner steadiness, your soul becomes unshakable. Detachment is not apathy, it is sacred discernment. It's the courage to walk away, not because you stopped loving, but because you started remembering your worth."
It's the strength to let silence speak louder than arguments. It's the wisdom to know that being ignored is not always rejection. Sometimes it's redirection. You don't owe anyone your breakdown. You don't need to collapse to prove you cared. The Stoic way is to feel fully, then act wisely. To process your grief, not perform it. To respond with dignity instead of reacting in desperation. Every time you choose dignity over desperation, you take back power that was never theirs to hold. Yes, letting go hurts, but holding on to what erodes your self-respect hurts even more. And when you stop begging for closeness that costs you your center, you discover something extraordinary yourself, stronger, clearer, still standing. If this message has reached you at the moment you needed it most, let it be a mark of change. Write the words inner freedom below as a reminder to yourself and to others that peace isn't something you beg for, it's something you claim.
And if this space gave you room to breathe, to reflect, to heal, consider subscribing. Not out of pressure, but as a quiet decision to walk deeper into this journey of clarity, calm, and conscious living. Because detachment is not the end, it's the beginning of authorship. It's where silence becomes strength and loss transforms into wisdom. And in the next video, we'll explore what comes after letting go, how to rebuild a life so powerful, so rooted in who you are, that no person, no absence, no ending can ever take it from you again. Until then, be gentle with your healing, ruthless with your boundaries, and faithful to your own becoming. You are already enough. Now go protect that.